Joy LaChica, New Democratic Party, Mariam Monsef, Liberal Party, and the incumbent Peterborough Kawartha MP, and Shante White from the Green Party. They will answer the first question in that order, and I'll switch things up for the following questions. So, Michelle Ferrari, we start with you. And the first topic is carbon drawdown. In spring of 2021, Canadian Parliament passed the Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. This act requires binding emissions reductions targets at 5-year intervals starting in 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. While targets are needed, concrete policies that reduce emissions are important. What are 2 key policies you support that will ensure Canada sufficiently reduces emissions by 2030 and to net zero by 2050?
Thank you so much for the question, and thanks for having us here tonight. And thank you to my fellow candidates. Yes, obviously it's going to take a lot more than 2 key policies to deal with our climate crises. And I want to start off by saying too that this is not just a national issue, this is a global issue, and the atmosphere doesn't much care about borders. So we have to be doing all that we can. We have, many outlined approaches in our document, and I strongly encourage people to take a look when they get a chance. Conservative.ca/plan, you can download it. It's 160 pages, and you'll see lots and lots of information there on what we want to do. And one of the things, the first step, obviously, is implementing known technologies into the Canadian economic mosaic. So, for example, we have our electric cars, we have our small molecular reactors, hydrogen, nuclear, all of these things. I had the chance to visit Clean Tech Commons yesterday. It's exciting, amazing on the Trent University property. These are the kinds of things we want to unleash innovation in, as well as we have an innovation cluster here in Peterborough, Ontario, which is absolutely outstanding. So we, the Conservatives, definitely want to get out of the way of people who know how to do this and create the environment for this technology to come to surface to really save our climate and invest in it. Obviously, we want to investigate emerging technological advances as well. So direct air capture, carbon capture, and all of these things. Our first 5 policy for deploying new emissions reduction technology. So lots of information out here that we want to do to help further develop the innovation and unleash the innovation, while at the same time holding people accountable for what they're doing on a personal level. I know we're much past the personal level at this point, but we still need to be holding people accountable as well with our low savings carbon tax.
Thank you. Well within our 2 minutes. And Joy, same question too. Do you need the question repeated?
Sure. Thank you. I'll take a repeat of the question. Thanks.
What are the 2 key policies you support that will ensure Canada sufficiently reduces emissions by 2030 and to net zero by 2050?
Thank you, and I appreciate being here this evening, and thank you to Green Up and all the organizations that put this together. As for the Net Zero Emissions Act, we know that it's come forth out of a lack of reduction of our carbon emissions, and it really creates a mechanism of legally binding governments to reach measured targets incrementally in order to arrive at 2030 by a target of cutting emissions by more than half and meeting that 1.5 degree target. We know that what the New Democrats have recently proposed around public transit is a policy that will be really effective. We want to create a double investment in public transit and help municipalities from a federal point of view and with federal help to electrify fleets by 2030, making public transit more affordable and perhaps even free in some locales. It's important to get our cars off the roads to reduce our carbon emissions. So that's a really significant piece. We need to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies in entirety, which means no to new pipelines and buying pipelines and keeping pipelines. Instead, we should be retrofitting homes. We should have a brand new paradigm and how we approach things with the Net Zero Emissions Act. So those are a couple of things that I think that are important. We also know that we have an infrastructure bank, but we should have a climate bank to invest in fighting climate emergency, another policy. So that's a third.
Seconds.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings us then to Miriam. Miriam Monsef, would you like the question repeated?
No, thank you so much, Mr. Hendry. Hello, everybody. Bonjour, Anin, salam alaikum. I'm at my kitchen table in Peterborough Kawartha on Mississauga and Anishinaabe territory, and this is our second debate of the day. So it's great to see my colleagues again. I want to thank all of you for bringing us together. We are in a climate emergency, and as your Liberal candidate, I can say to you, the Liberal Party of Canada is the only party this election that has received high grades by economists, by scientists, by climate activists for having the best climate plan by a long ways compared to other parties. Our plan is based on the ambitions that those of you who have been working on this for decades have pushed us to get to. It's based on the demand for stronger federal leadership that we heard from young people during the last election. And we have a 50-point plan to reduce our emissions, to get us to 40 to 50% of 2005 levels, in line with where science needs us to go. We'll reach net zero by 2050, and we'll do so by creating jobs, investing in science. I was pleased to support and push for federal investments in the innovation cluster, in clean tech commons, in Noble Gen, in random acts of green, and we got to do more. We're going to continue to ensure we price pollution. We're making it easier to purchase a zero emissions vehicle with a $5,000 rebate. We're providing rebates to Canadians to upgrade their homes so that they are more energy efficient. We are capping oil and gas emissions at current levels to ensure that we move towards a decline from here on. We're going to require half of new car sales to be zero emission by 2030 and all by 2035. And we're phasing out subsidies for fossil fuels faster. This is because of leaders and experts like those in this riding, and I look forward to working with you to address the climate emergency and to create jobs.
Thank you. And finally, for this question, Shantae, would you like the question repeated?
Yes, sure, I'd like it repeated. Thank you.
What are two key policies you support that will ensure Canada sufficiently reduces emissions by 2030 into net zero by 2050?
I first want to thank you, Mr. Moderator, and all the organizers for setting this up together. The Green Party, we believe that we need to achieve net zero emissions as quickly as possible. In order to organize this, we need a stringent goal and an accountability framework. So the Green Party goal is to have a reduction of greenhouse gases by 60% of the 2005 levels by 2030, with clear enforceable targets and timelines starting at 2023, as well as aiming to be net negative actually by 2050. This accountability framework as well is a detailed carbon budget determining the cumulative amount of GHGs, greenhouse gases, that Canada can emit to do its part to keep warming below the 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Thank you. I've been called Mr. twice tonight. That's more than I usually get in a year. We will now move to question 2. The topic is toxics, environmental regulations, clean air and water. And the question will go first to Joy. The Canadian Environmental Protection Act is the overarching law to protect the health and environment of Canadians. This act sets out regulations that prevent pollution and restrict toxic substances. The act has not been significantly amended since it was first introduced in 1999. A parliamentary committee released a report in 2017 with recommendations to update and improve the act. What are the 2 most important updates to CEPA that you would support? Joy?
Thank you. And CEPA and Bill C-28 are so significant because ultimately it's about the human right to a clean environment. So if Bill C-28 is passed, SEPA can become the first federal law to recognize this right, which is incredible and an important step forward. We know that we need to further and better protect Canadians from toxic substances in everyday products like cosmetics. We know we need to go further by enshrining in law the Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights so that all communities can enjoy a guarantee to clean water and air. We know that is such an issue. And in all of this discussion, we need to be talking about our partnership with Indigenous communities and how our plans for climate action include that. And I preface everything with that because it's something that it should be very stated in the forefront that this partnership is very important. We need to codify our plan to protect 30% of our land, freshwater, and oceans by 2030 as part of a SEPA update. We need to support biodiversity, protect pollinator health, and ban single-use plastics. So these would be important updates that I would see need to be brought forward for SEPA. It's so important. It's existed since 1999. It's a fixture for us, and we need to move it forward and bring these updates forth.
Thank you. Then we would move to Shantae. What are the two most important updates to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that you would support?
So I definitely believe, like my colleagues have already stated, it needs to be modernized. So we would do so by prioritizing legislation to modernize the act itself, as well as ensure the right to a healthy environment enforceable by law. And one more, preventing exposures to toxins and pollution by requiring labeling of chemicals on GMOs and consumer products, including cosmetics, cleaners, and furniture. As well, we would like to regulate microfibers as a toxic substance under CEPA, as well invoke the precautionary principle in making decisions about approvals of products, substances, and projects in a process where the potential for irreversible harm is noted.
Thank you. And next we will have Michelle. What are the two most important updates to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that you would support?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. It should be noted first that I think this should be noted. Prime Minister Mulroney introduced the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, SEPA, first comprehensive pollution plan back in 1998. So I think it's important to note that sometimes Conservatives have a bad rap, but we've done a lot here in terms of that. Obviously, there needs to be continued effort to categorizing existing and emerging substances. I think to get a little personal here, I think, I've had some family members impacted directly by harmful substances, endocrine disruptors. I have a child who has a severe allergy to a lot of pollutants and a lot of chemicals. So, I know firsthand what these chemicals are doing to not just us, but to the environment, to animals. So I think we need to definitely be looking at these. I think there's 27,000 harmful chemicals that need to be evaluated on this. So I think there's, that needs to be sort of audited as well. And what can we do? We obviously can't do it all at once. So what can we do right now and look at the ones that are most toxic? Obviously in our plan, in our recovery plan, so that's our big focus of the entire election is recovery. So we want to propose to end raw sewage dumping. This is obviously a very, very big issue that we don't want to see. Closer to home, we want to reinstate the Lake Simcoe Cleanup Fund, the vital natural resources so many rely and call home. Obviously, this was canceled by Justin Trudeau in 2017, and it funded over 200 community-based projects. Invasive species is another key component that we'd like to see as well brought to the surface when we look at stonewort as well. I know that we're working on the Trent Severn Waterway, and that's critical, but we should also be looking at what we can do within that development at our locks to ensure that boaters aren't transmitting. Thank you.
And finally, for this question, Miriam Monsef, what are the two most important updates to the Canadian Environmental Protection Act that you would support?
Okay, Jim Hendry, I'll stop calling you Mr. Hendry.
I'll feel
and
much
it's nice.
better.
Okay, feel more at home. It's nice to see over 200 people on this Zoom, by the way. The bill was introduced. It didn't pass in the last parliament, but the Liberals are absolutely committed to reintroducing it, to strengthening it, and making it top legislative priority. And one of the things that excites me about it is enshrining the right to a healthy environment into federal law, which is a huge step forward. And the bill would also commit the federal government to do more to protect the most vulnerable, including children, and more to protect those with exposure to pollutants higher than average. And that includes downwind or downstream, particularly for Indigenous communities. We have an action plan to protect firefighters from exposure to burning flame retardants found in household products. And we know that a disproportionate number of people who live in environmentally hazardous areas are Indigenous, lower income, or racialized. One of the things I really like about what we're going to move forward on is requiring the Minister of Environment and Climate Change to examine the link between race, socioeconomic status, and exposure to environmental risk, and to develop a strategy to address environmental justice, which is something that particularly young leaders have been pushing for. In addition, there is an opportunity to show strong leadership on banning harmful single-use plastic items, ensuring that producers are more responsible for their packaging waste, and requiring increased recycled content in packaging. So there's more, but you asked for a couple and I gave you a few.
That's very great. Thanks very much. You were dead on time. And that wraps up that question. So the next general topic is Indigenous rights and the environment. Indigenous people have an important role in understanding and protecting our environment. In spring 2021, Parliament passed the Undrip Act, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Work must continue to implement this act and advance reconciliation. What are two key environmental policies that you support that will advance Undrip in Canada? And we'll start this one with Shantae.
Thank you. The Green Party is committed to reconciliation, nation-to-nation engagement, and self-determination for Indigenous peoples. And we also believe that a meaningful path towards reconciliation in Canada must first ensure that First Nations, Inuit, Métis Nation leaders are leading the decisions about the future of their people, their lands, and their territories. The Greens are committed to implementing Undrip for the First Nations to support. The Green Party believes that every nation has a right to decide who speaks on its behalf, and the government of Canada must be led by Indigenous people who respect designing this type of legislation. We've heard from several First Nations who've told us that they had not been consulted actually on Bill C-15. A Green government will ensure that all First Nations are thoroughly involved in the development and the design of Undrip implementation legislation. Greens would also ensure that any nations who do not support would not have it imposed upon them. Indigenous peoples who are protesting these developments on their lands, I also would like to mention, are not criminals. A Green government will respect Indigenous sovereignty over self-defined and self-governed lands, whether First Nation, Métis Nation, or Inuit, and respect all other rights to their title, their land and titles, including the right to stewardship.
Thank you. And the second participant for this question would be Mariam Monsef. What are two key environmental policies that you support that will advance Undrip in Canada?
Thanks, Jim. A few things. The bill that we did introduce in the House of Commons and were able to pass requires the Government of Canada to work in consultation and cooperation in a distinction-based way with Indigenous peoples to prepare an action plan to address key things such as injustices, measures that align existing law with Undrip. And moving forward, a re-elected Liberal government will ensure that the whole of government approach to Undrip is part of every single cabinet minister's mandate letter. I can tell you, if something's not in a minister's mandate letter, it is not likely to get done. So this will be big, and it sends a big message to the whole of machinery of government. In terms of policies, we are committed to conserving more land, inland waters, marine and coastal areas, and Indigenous-led conservation is going to play a key role in that. As stewards of lands, waters since time immemorial with deep knowledge, we believe that an investment of $340 million in new funding to specifically support Indigenous leadership in nature conservation is going to be key. And I also want to say a special thanks to those who've taught me, particularly Indigenous women, who've taught me that water is sacred. You asked for a focus on freshwater, and because of your effective advocacy, a re-elected Liberal government will move forward to establish a Canada Water Agency to safeguard our fresh waters and modernize the Canada Water Act to reflect our freshwater reality, including Indigenous water rights and implementing a strengthened freshwater action plan and more.
Thank you. The next participant for this question would be Joy. Do you need the question repeated?
No, thank you. Thanks a lot, Jim. So as for Undrip, we need to think about the fact that our climate crisis is not just an environmental emergency. It threatens the traditional food sources and the very survival of some Indigenous communities. We know in the West, there has been tremendous drought. There's been food shortage, and this creates, migration and hunting changes of areas. Indigenous peoples have intimate connections to their homelands, territories, and to their resources, and have provided stewardship, and they're best placed to protect cultural and biological diversity through control over their own territory. So absolutely, the NDP believes fully that Indigenous sovereignty and self-determination are of the utmost importance. We need to recognize inherent rights, pardon me, title and treaty rights, that's Rosie, will be at the heart of our approach to climate change. As for we think of grassy narrows. We think of things that need to be fixed. We think of the Indigenous Guardians program that the NDP has proposed to invest in Indigenous-led science and support creation of Indigenous managed protected areas. That's such an important program. And we will commit $500 million to Indigenous-led forest stewardship projects. These are a couple of the things that Undrip and what the NDP will bring forward, acknowledging Undrip as an important piece in our nation-to-nation relationship as well. We listened to Chief Rosanna Archibald and how truth and reconciliation, climate change, economic growth, First Nations jurisdictions, and rebuilding and strengthening First Nations in Canada is the beginning. We need to listen, and we need to let them lead us. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank Rosie for her contribution. Okay, that was fine. My cat often jumps in on Zoom calls. The next area is the federal role in low carbon transition. Under our Constitution, provinces are responsible for natural resources and energy.
Jim, I think we missed out Michelle on that question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle? My apologies.
That's okay. We were all That's fine. I'm glad that someone else's dog interrupts them when they're trying to do Zoom. Makes me feel better. Yeah, I actually thank you for the question. Thanks so much. I think I would echo greatly what Shanti and Joy have said, and the Conservatives have definitely said, we would like to work in collaboration by letting Indigenous take the lead on their issues. And I think that's really it. I think on a local level, when we have somebody as incredible is Chief Emily Wheatung. You know, this is a woman who got a class action suit done in 18 months to get fresh drinking water. Most class action water suits take years. She's a real incredible person. And so I think watching and taking the lead and working to restore relationships, but definitely taking a back seat and letting, you know, for Indigenous by Indigenous approach is definitely the way the Conservatives want to approach all of this.
Thank you. All right, so now we go to the federal role in low carbon transition. Under our Constitution, provinces are responsible for natural resources and energy. What are the two best federal actions and/or policies you would support to facilitate a just transition to a low carbon energy system across Canada? And we'll begin this with Miriam.
Thank you, Jim. I share the admiration for Chief Wheatung and all the great Indigenous women who've led Curve Lake First Nation before her. But I would like to point out that the Conservative Party of Canada, under Mr. O'Toole's leadership, voted against Undrip just a few months ago in the House of Commons. Moving forward, a Liberal government has already committed to and has funded a green and just pandemic recovery. Since last September, we've invested more than $50 billion towards a green recovery from the pandemic. For example, we're funding transit projects and home retrofits, which are going to create jobs and cut pollution across the country and save folks money in their energy costs. Only Liberals know how to protect the environment and create jobs at the same time. And a re-elected Liberal government will introduce legislation to protect our environment and recognize for the first time that the right to a healthy environment is the law, as I mentioned earlier. We'll train workers so that they have the skills to work in a zero carbon economy and in zero carbon industries. And we'll protect workers by advancing Canada's first just transition legislation to support local and regional diversification strategies for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador in collaboration with labor groups, Indigenous leaders, investors, and environmental leaders. I will also say that we have seen here in our local community that we can create jobs and protect the environment at the same time. And Peterborough's expertise, if I'm reelected, will continue to shape the Canadian response to addressing climate change and creating jobs.
Thank you. And next we'll go to Michelle. What are the two best federal actions and/or policies you would support to facilitate a just transition to a low carbon energy system across Canada?
Jim, I want to point out too that Navius is an incredible organization. So Canadian leaders in quantifying the impacts of energy and climate policy, Navius simulated the expected outcome of our plan using a model that accounts for all economic activity in Canada. This model is used by most provincial governments and the federal government to assess the impact of climate policy. Navius found that our plan, the Conservative Party of Canada plan, would be expected to achieve substantially the same emission reductions by 2030 as a healthy environment and a healthy economy. So we would bring more jobs in doing it. So I want to talk about a couple things that we are looking to do. Obviously, you know, when you want to solve one problem, sometimes you often create another problem. So we've got to be very innovative in how we're going to do that. We obviously want to invest a lot in zero emission vehicles, because when we look at the transportation sector as a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, what are we going to do to correct that? So we need to be, you know, really investing in zero emission vehicles. We're going to invest $1 billion in building out electric vehicle manufacturing in Canada, including investing in battery production, parts manufacturing, micro-mobility solutions, and electric trucks. We will be working with provinces, territories, and municipalities to encourage the inclusion of a minimum number of EV charging spaces for new developments. And obviously, we're going to be looking at carbon capture as well. We'll be investing $5 billion in CCUS. So lots of work to do. And again, on a local level, we have some incredible initiatives here that we're working on as well.
Thank you. And Shantae, would you like the question repeated?
I'm okay, thank you. I just want to note something. We've known that climate change is an issue for many years. We've had liberal and conservative governments for over 100 years, but yet nothing has been done. So I think that's just really important to note. We have the Trudeau Liberals buying a pipeline in the middle of trying to counter the effects of climate change. Again, that doesn't really solve the problem at all. The 2021 Green Party platform lists a large number of actions that the federal government can take in that shift to a clean green economy. One of the ways that we would do so is through the retrofitting of all the buildings in Canada so that they can be net zero. This would help benefit the economy because we'd bring in green jobs. We would also be investing in local sectors as well as local talent. As well, we would help subsidize all of this through a guaranteed livable income. Through the creation of a comprehensible guaranteed livable income for every person in Canada, we would help, again, strengthen our economy as well as the people who are reliant on social services. We already have services like this for seniors as well as persons under 18. It's time that we take care of all the Canadians so that no one gets left behind.
Thank you. And finally, for that question, Joy, what are the two best federal actions and/or policies you would support to facilitate a just transition to a low carbon energy system across Canada?
Thank you, Jim. And just with the context of being so behind in the last 6 years, we're the country of the G7 that are the furthest behind in reducing our carbon emissions. And in fact, our emissions have increased over these 6 years of a Liberal government. So we don't have time to waste, and we don't have time for gradual transitions to a green economy. Our action needs to be swift. We do need to retrofit our older buildings. This will create a new good jobs infrastructure. We know that in our old homes here, some of them in Peterborough Kawartha, we have gas. We need to transition that to electric in our heating and cooling systems because that is a great energy expender. The Greener Homes Grant will be so important. We know that working municipally in terms of a transit template that makes more sense so that people are drawn to using transit more. That's already happening here in the city of Peterborough. It's wonderful. And organizations, green organizations are working together to make that happen. It's been great to be part of the host of people listening and participating in that. We also look forward to the new cycling trails, and that is a primary means of transportation for folks in Peterborough Kawartha. It's a beautiful place. We can get from A to B, not using our vehicles that burn fossil fuels. We need zero emissions vehicles, absolutely. And we need to get cycling and reducing our carbon footprint. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, those are the 4 pre-submitted questions that the candidates had seen in advance. And now we'll start with some of the questions that were submitted either in advance of by participants or during the debate tonight. Question number 5, and Michelle, I'll let you know you'll be going first on this one. We know that climate change is a global problem. What steps will your government take to compel other countries to reduce their carbon emissions?
Thank you, Jim. I like this question a lot, so thank you. I think one of the big issues that we really want to do, the Conservative Party of Canada, and our recovery plan is really stay strong with Made in Canada. In this pandemic, we've been outsourcing to China for our PPE and our vaccines. We can do all of this here in our own country and be doing it in a green way, in an innovative way. And I think we have the wherewithal and the passion to do this. So that is one of the key things we would really like to do, is to work with our own country instead of countries who are major contributors, and to create accountability within our own Canadians to be a part of the solution.
Thank you. Joy, what steps would your government take to compel other countries to reduce their carbon emissions?
Well, as a climate activist and as a labor leader, every year for the last 4 years, I've been attending. I've been a delegate at the United Nations Committee for the Status of Women, where we revisit, and women are deeply affected by so many things in our global landscape in these years. But there's always, as part of that convention, a revisiting of the United Nations 17 sustainable development goals, because it's all very integrated, and we need to make sure that in countries that that struggle as we are, that we are there talking to each other about best practices, that we're sharing the struggles, that we're providing supports, and that we're working in an intersectional way through global networks, and just being able to share on a global level through the internet and through web conferences what we can do. Foreign policy and our relationships and diplomacy through the United Nations is very important. And we look to those sustainable development goals. That's where the Paris targets came from, and that's how we incrementally measure where we're going. So I look forward to continuing to be part of that process, and being a part of a platform and just a group of folks and countries that care deeply, are impassioned, and have a vision for this more than anything else. If we can't save our planet, we can't do the political action work that we need to do to save humanity and our own communities. We need to save our planet first. It's the most important thing we could ever do. So I'm committed to that. I want to be part of that going forward and have those global conversations in an ongoing way.
Thank you. Miriam, what steps will your government take to compel other countries to reduce their carbon emissions?
Well, we've been at the COP table, and those of you who know Catherine McKenna have seen her push. When we hosted the G7, Canada ensured that we had a separate table, especially for women. She called it Women Kicking It on Climate. And Rosemary Ganley represented Peterborough Kawartha at that table. Our trade agreements, including the new NAFTA, include a provision around environmental protection. And as someone who led Canada's delegation for the Commission on the Status of Women at the United Nations on several occasions, I can tell you that not only are we creating space for this conversation with the Global South and the Global North, but we've also worked hard to create space for Indigenous leaders, Canadian Indigenous leaders at the UN, to make sure that these conversations are happening in a good way. Additionally, and perhaps most importantly, Canada can lead by example. When we put a price on pollution, when we invest in green tech, when we support workers across the country through the transition, when we show that we can create jobs and protect the environment at the same time, that lets the rest of the world know that there is a way forward to protect the environment, protect our planet, and grow the economy at the same time.
Thank you. And finally, on this question, Shantae, what steps will your government take to compel other countries to reduce their carbon emissions?
Thank you for the question. We definitely believe that we should, like Miriam just stated, lead by example. By putting a price on carbon and putting a price on certain goods imported from other countries that have weak greenhouse gas emissions reduction policies and practices, or that have policies below acceptable baselines. CBA would also have several key advantages, such as enhancing the competitiveness of North American firms that are more energy efficient than their global competitors, as well help prevent the relocation of industrial production and thus greenhouse gas emissions to where climate policies are weaker. As well, it incentivizes other countries to effectively price their own carbon as a way to keep those revenues rather than allow Canada or the US to collect them.
Thank you. And we will move to question 6. And Joy, you will be the first to answer this. Alberta's economy is significantly tied to fossil fuel extraction. As Canada and the world transition away from fossil fuel as the primary energy source, how will your government help Alberta and families that currently rely on the fossil fuel industry to remain economically stable?
Thank you. We've seen it begin. We know that the Canadian auto industry has been deeply impacted in recent years, and we've seen a just transition. We see electric vehicles that are being produced in Oshawa now. This is just a small example of what could be done on a larger scale, but it really is dependent on leadership. It's leadership with a vision, and leadership that proclaims something that is achievable, something that is a project to work towards in an optimistic way. New Democrats have a leader that talks about hope and optimism, and that includes making transitions to a clean economy swiftly. We shouldn't be tarrying any longer with the tar sands. It should have been addressed in a swift way some time ago. But unfortunately, there have been failures. Trudeau's Liberals connected with the big oil companies an average of 3 times a day and handed them an average of $900 million more per year than the Harper Conservatives did. He delayed help for oil and gas workers, but found hundreds of millions of dollars for CEOs and shareholders. Herein is the problem. Herein is the reason that we are so far behind. We cannot any longer tarry. We need to show communities in Alberta that we can transform. It's a transformative thing that can happen. And it's exciting that we have an opportunity to make a choice for leadership that believes in that transformation and that it can be done. What's happened in Germany, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, where they're light years ahead of us, and they started it at the same place in Paris. We can do it too if we create that sense of belief, that sense of urgency, and a plan that is bright. We can do it if we vote NDP.
Thank you. Dante, Alberta's economy is significantly tied to fossil fuel extraction. As Canada and the world transition away from fossil fuel as a primary energy source, how will your government help Alberta and families that currently rely on the fossil fuel industry to remain economically stable?
Thank you for the question. I think it's really important that we have a just transition for oil and gas workers. Something like free post-secondary to ensure that these people can relearn the skills that they'll need to transition into a new economy would definitely be an asset to those individuals. Also, another idea would perhaps be, instead of using the money for a pipeline, we use that to fund labor training that would help us shift into a green economy instead of, adding more to the issues that we have at hand already. Create a decentralized renewable energy grid to ensure the stability of the transition that we are hoping to achieve, as well incentivize green investments, existing pollution cleanup that will require work, things like this.
Thank you. Michelle, are you good with the question? Would you like it repeated?
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, I think this is really important. I think when we look at Alberta, how do you phase out livelihood, culture, generations of living? How do you do that effectively? And I think, visiting Clean Tech Commons yesterday is a great example of how you do that. You think ahead right now. You have 1 foot in now and you have 1 foot in the future. And you have to be investing. You have to unleash innovation, which is critical and in part of our platform. You have to be investing in what's going to work in the future. Hydrogen cars, we need to be looking into what we can do and then have that transition program in place. And that's what we want to do. We want to unleash innovation. We want to invest and support the tech companies and the research development in order for them to do that. We want to be the supportive government to allow that space and access to the capital to do that.
Thank you. And Mary Monsef, your response to that question.
Thanks, Jim. And I appreciate this question. I remember in my first year, must have been my second year as MP, climate activist came into my office and we had a really helpful conversation. And one of the things we talked about was, how do we look our neighbors in Alberta in the eye and tell them that they got to stop going to work the next day, they have to stop feeding their families, and that you're even asking this question is a reminder of just how interdependent we are and how wise the group putting these questions together is. I've connected with my colleagues in Alberta, and the key here is a diversified economy. Why are we moving forward with high-speed internet in the Western prairies? It's because it'll allow them to diversify their economies. We're investing in clean tech locally, and Alberta is already innovating, and we are supporting that innovation. We're also reminding them by cleaning up orphan wells that they are part of Canada's transition, that they will not be left behind, and their economy can grow as we ensure a clean environment. Those electric vehicles are already being produced in Oshawa. Clean Tech Commons was invested in by a Liberal government. We're investing in transportation options, whether it's via rail here in Peterborough or transportation, active transportation and public transportation in Alberta. And the last thing I'll say on this, as the minister responsible for rural economic development, we are offering upskilling, reskilling, debt relief, and incentives for workers, including through the Just Transition Act that I spoke about earlier. But we're giving incentives to teachers, early learning childhood educators, doctors, nurses, to go set up shop in rural communities, including in Alberta, so that they're able to benefit from the same suite of services that those of us in urban centers benefit from. And feeling like those services are available, feeling like you're getting ahead just as much as the folks out east are, for Albertans and folks in prairies, is really important so that they feel like they're part of this transition and not being left behind.
Thank you. Question 7, and Miriam, you will be first on this one. We would like to hear how your party will work toward the global diversity targets for 2030, including ensuring that at least 30% of important land and sea area are conserved.
Thanks, Jim. We're moving forward and we are protecting our land. We are protecting our waters, including our fresh waters as well as our oceans. There is work happening here locally, and I'm really pleased that folks like the Kawartha Land Trust, for example, they showed up to Ottawa a few years ago, and they made a pitch to the federal government that if we invested in them and orgs like them, they'd be able to tap into the philanthropy and the climate concerns that local communities had and build funds that further support and conserve lands in our communities and across the country. And we did that, by the way. Good job, Kawartha Land Trust. In addition to that, we've committed to supporting 10 more national parks. And I think that bodes well for all of us who are environmental enthusiasts, but also want to see the beauty of this land protected.
Thank you. Michelle Ferreri, we would like to hear how your party will work toward the global diversity targets for 2030, including ensuring that at least 30% of important land and sea area are conserved.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Jim. I think we're going to continue to do what we want to do in this recovery plan. And I think that we need to focus on getting our economy stabilized, taking care of what we need to do here. We have incredible, our riding in particular, Peterborough Kawartha, is exceptional, as is Canada from coast to coast. So we have incredible leadership at the helm with the Conservative Party of Canada to do that and to invest in what's working and to continue to help those that need it. I think there's a lot of work to be done, and we're here to do it. And I look forward to working with all of the organizations and across the country to conserve what we have, but also invest in the innovation and technology to look forward into the future, to build a stronger economy so that we have even more to invest in our future.
Thank you. And Shantae, your plans for preserving biodiversity.
Thank you. I think one of the biggest things that we can do is stop or end the logging on all old growth forests. as well as supporting Indigenous protected areas. Miriam commented about how they're doing their best to protect freshwater sources, but I just want to make everybody aware again, there are children on Curve Lake Reserve who still don't have access to fresh water. They're in the water every day fishing and, you know, boating and enjoying themselves, going about their daily lives, but yet they can't drink the water. So it's really important that we are supporting Indigenous peoples, protecting their areas, ensuring that there is no contaminants going into their water sources. As well, we would like to restore most negatively affected ecosystems, such as wetlands. Again, not buying pipelines that go through wetlands. As well, we're gonna enact more nature-based solutions.
Thank you. And Joy, your thoughts on this question?
Thank you, Jim. You know, we have a tremendous task because we are in a pandemic and we're rising together like never before while a climate emergency escalates. So emphasizing the working together is really essential, and it's important, and we appreciate the dialogue around all of these issues so that we can work together on all levels of government, no matter who is elected. Earlier we discussed that you know, water, clean air, water, all of that is so important, and we think about flow of water, and the Council of Canadians is here, and I think of Water on the Table and Maud Barlow and all the work that she did to educate around the tar sands and the rivers that flow, and how over time there are toxicity issues that we need to look at, and grassy narrows, and the protests that happen there because of what hasn't been put right yet. There's a lot of work that has to be done to reconcile. There's a lot of work to be done moving forward. And I think that the legislation that we have in terms of the Canadian Environmental Bill of Rights to ensure that our communities can legally enjoy a right to clean water, land, and air will create a mechanism for accountability for governments, for communities, for everyone that uses the water and breathes the air. We want to support biodiversity in the NDP. We have to ban single-use plastics. It is an urgent situation in our oceans, as we see. So as New Democrats, we look forward to building that together in Ottawa and in our local community.
Thank you. The next question, Shante, you will be up first on this one. How will you work to implement Indigenous-led protected areas and harvesting practices, particularly in light of the 2018 Williams Treaty settlement in this territory?
Thank you. I think it's something that has already been stated as well. Working in collaboration with Indigenous peoples to ensure that their needs are being met, and it's not just the government telling them what needs to be done or what needs to change. As well, we believe that by supporting them in the industries that they are pursuing, it will help strengthen them and give them more self-autonomy and self-determination in their communities. Thank
you. Miriam, how will you work to implement Indigenous-led protected areas and harvesting practices, particularly in light of the 2018 Williams Treaty settlement in this territory?
That's a really important question, Jim, and I was pleased to be part of the effort to make sure that the settlement of that treaty happened, and I'll continue to take my lead from Indigenous leaders in Williams Treaty. The issue of Minoman particularly has been one that my office and I have been involved with since the very beginning, with Parks Canada, with the cottagers, but of course with Indigenous communities as well. And Parks Canada is leading that effort as we speak, but we've ensured that the minister responsible for environment and climate change is keenly aware of what this means. One of the heartwarming aspects of this, and I remember a very tense town hall up in Buckhorn a few years ago about this topic, no one argued if there was an inherent right. Everybody agreed that there was a treaty right, and it was about implementing it. So, I will commit to continuing to stay on the right side of history on this, to protect our community and make sure that we move forward in a good way. And I'll take my lead from Indigenous leaders, particularly those who are part of the Williams Treaty.
Thank you. And Joy, your response? Do you need the question repeated?
No, thanks, Jim. So certainly relationships and nation-to-nation relationships and conversations and relationship building is so important. And if I were elected MP, I would absolutely make every effort to extend that and make that happen on a regular basis. It's so important to work jointly with our Indigenous leadership in Williams Treaty territory for planning climate emergency management strategies, dealing with floods and wildfires should they occur. And we know that, tornadoes have been tearing through areas not so far from us. We need to talk about how we're going to deal with climate emergency management and what we will gain from Indigenous traditional and ecological knowledge will be so helpful to all of us. And it will help us to improve our existing infrastructure, and it will help us develop new infrastructure and support response efforts as we go forward into the future together. So that relationship, that nation-to-nation partnership and ongoing conversation will need to be important to address everything that lies ahead.
Thank you. And finally on this one, Michelle.
Thank you, Jim. This has been a heated topic in our region for a long time. And it is something that I've covered extensively through my journalism and also just as a person who lives in this community. You have to find a way to get people to come to the table to chat and talk and mediate and find a solution while respecting that of the Indigenous. So there's a lot to learn here. I've had very big discussions with a lot of people. I was able to facilitate a meeting already that had never happened in 10 years for two people to sit at a table and chat. This is what we need. We need active representation in the community where people are coming together and listening. And sometimes we're not going to like what each other says, but we need to be talking and to move forward and also respect, by Indigenous, for Indigenous, by Indigenous, and following the lead of them.
Thank you. And we will move to the next question. Michelle, you will be first on this one. What will your party do about the expansion of BWXT and powdered uranium processing in the heart of Peterborough across the street from an elementary school? Sorry, Michelle, did you hear that? You're up first on this one.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Are we referring to, can you clarify which school you're
the Prince of Wales School on Monaghan Road. BWXT is part of the old GE plant complex.
Another heated topic locally that we've seen here. And obviously when children's health and welfare is impacted, as a mom, it's important to take these things seriously. I can't speak on a federal level that we have anything implemented, but I can speak on a local level that I would be committed to making sure that everybody's voices are heard and that we're doing our due diligence and commitment to ensure safety for everybody, and that everything that needs to be done on a safety level and an environmental assessment level is committed and done. We have an incredible organization here locally, Cambium, that I know would be great to work with and ensuring that that people are doing what they need to do to ensure safety for children first.
Thank you. Joy, your response, what will your party do about the expansion of BWXT and powdered uranium processing in the heart of Peterborough across the street from an elementary school?
Thank you, Jim, for the question. The NDP plans to reach net zero electricity without nuclear power Locally, it's important to note that BWXT is not directly fuel production for Peterborough. Pelleting is the one component of a larger supply chain, as we know, which is dominated by companies like Cameco, that was once a Crown corporation. And this Crown corporation was sold off by Mulroney, and that hasn't been reversed by successive Liberal and Conservative governments. So here we are. And when we're combating the climate crisis, as we are, we cannot simply put our eggs in the basket of a private conglomerate like this. And that's what I can state around that as a New Democrat. We're concerned.
Thank you. Miriam, your response to that question.
Thank you. And when this issue first came up, my commitment to the local group advocating for it was to create a space and make sure that the arm's length agency, BWXT and others heard from the neighborhood and those concerned. And, you know, say this as well, it's really important for these arm's length agencies to remain so and remain so from political interference. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is tasked with regulating the nuclear industry and protecting the health and safety of Canadians. Moving forward, though, as we discussed earlier about the CEPA bill, we would put forward a strengthened CEPA bill that would protect the most vulnerable from hazardous chemicals, including children, and to protect those with exposure to pollutants that are higher than average. And that's certainly something that is relevant here, and a stronger CEPA bill would be part of a greater national response to move forward with.
Thank you. And Shantae, finally on that question.
Thank you. So the Green Party policy states that we will ban nuclear power in Canada. This will happen over a period of time. As well, environmental impacts assessments for small nuclear reactors, it's important to note there are none being done under the Liberal government. We need transparency around the issue, and children's health need to always be prioritized. Going back to the water crisis happening in Curve Lake, there are children who have never had fresh, clean water from their taps for longer than they've been alive. And they finally come to an age where they're able to vote against the Liberal government to get their rights back in regards to freshwater resources.
Thank you. We'll move then to the next question. Joy, you will be first up on this one. Would your party commit to funding a nationwide EV charging network, electric vehicles? Would it commit to a national EV mandate?
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. So we absolutely do commit to 100% light duty vehicles to be zero emissions by 2035. That is what our goal is. And we know that, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the fleet of transit systems that Jagmeet has talked about today actually is going to be something that of electric vehicles, buses, will be something that will be so helpful to communities. It's a sign of leadership and urgency in terms of making such a huge difference in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions in a regular, systematic way. So absolutely.
Thank you. Shantae, would your party commit to funding a nationwide EV charging network? Would it commit to a national EV mandate?
Yes, we would. We would also propose to ban combustion single engines sales by 2030, as well as expanding on charging stations for electric vehicles. It's important that we invest in our infrastructure in order to support these transitions. And green vehicles on the road will definitely be more beneficial when it comes to cutting emissions and achieving those climate targets that the party has indicated already.
Thank you very much. Michelle, your response on electric vehicles.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, we will be investing $1 billion in building out electric vehicle manufacturing in Canada, including investing in battery production, parts manufacturing, micro-mobility solutions, and electric trucks.
Thank you. And Miriam, you get the final word on this one.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, and we're already doing this. In fact, jobs are being created in Oshawa to do that. I do want to address a few things that my colleagues have pointed out here tonight and address the misstatements. First of all, the SMRs and the robust regulatory approach to make sure they're safe, that's already happening. We can't get to net zero without that work. We're moving forward to ensure that this February, when Curve Lake First Nation leadership receives the final detailed design for their water treatment facility, that there's funding available and we can move forward and get shovels in the ground to get that clean drinking water to them, in addition to the 109 communities whose boil water advisories have been lifted, so will Curve Lake First Nation.
Thank you. All right, next question. Miriam, you'll be first up on this one. Peterborough has declared a climate emergency. How would your party support our municipality in both mitigation and adaptation efforts?
I want to congratulate the group who pushed so hard, and council and the mayor for accepting that we are indeed in a climate emergency. And as your member of parliament, I've taken that voice and that sense of urgency to Ottawa every single day. And the result of that is a 50-point plan to curb emissions, to ensure that there's certainty for business and for families, and to get us to net zero emissions by 2050. Locally, we were able to make the case for why Via Rail should go through Peterborough, and we made that case effectively, and we are moving forward with that. Locally, we made the case for ZEVs, and I want to thank particularly Trisha Clarkson for her advocacy, as well as the advocacy for electric buses, because that work is now happening and well underway. This community pushed for a triple bottom line for our infrastructure investments, the $180+ billion infrastructure program, which covers up to 80% of infrastructure costs in communities across the country, including our own. And that's happening now, and Peterborough can be proud of that work. There's so much humble bragging to do on behalf of the people of Peterborough Kawartha and the contributions that you've made to our climate plan. It's the only plan that's going to curb emissions, create jobs, and bring the whole country along. And Peterborough Kawartha, you've had a big role in shaping that plan, and I'd be honored to continue to serve you and take your great ideas to Ottawa. I see Al and Linda Slavin are here as well. They represent a really important group of Canadians who are ahead of their time and decades ahead of the rest of us, pushed and brought governments along. I thank you for that and for all the ways that you've taught and mentored me.
Thank you. And Michelle, how would your party support our municipality in both climate emergency mitigation and adaptation efforts?
Thanks, Jim. I don't know how we can be proud if we're in a climate emergency. I'm not sure how those two things go together, but I think what we can do is continue to work with farmers who are focusing on regenerative farming and, you know, listen to the youth and continue to move forward with plans that actually help. And I think there are a lot of people doing great work here for sure, but we need to get ourselves out of this climate emergency for sure. And, you know, I had the luxury to go and visit with lots of amazing farmers here locally doing great groundwork, including Leahy's and doing regenerative farming, which I think is things we need to really look at.
Thank you. Shantae, your response.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much for the question. So the Green Party of Canada supports the charter city movement. If cities are to have the tools needed to develop long-range plans, For improved public transit and affordable housing, their decisions must be respected by provincial governments. They also require more than 10% of all taxes that are collected within their boundaries. With stable sources of additional funds, municipalities, large and small, will no longer have to struggle to do something like this. This would also ensure that we're better able to serve the people in these communities.
Thank you. And finally on this one, Joy, how would your party support a municipality in both climate emergency mitigation and adaptation efforts?
Thank you, Jim. I think complacency and discouragement, sometimes a lack of belief over time is an obstacle in terms of us moving this forward. I think that there needs to be, just like our youth who participate in Fridays for Future, and in the spirit of Greta, we need to proclaim it from the mountaintops, and we need to educate one another. There's an and I'm glad that the Slavens were mentioned. We need an intergenerational approach to the wisdom that and the energy that comes both directions, from youth and from those who are older, and can teach us things about how to activate and how to organize, who have the political analysis and can share that with us. We need to be teachable. We need to send the message. And we need to do some good grassroots organizing within all our communities. You know, in the labor movement, this is something that we do, and we need to do it around this climate emergency in a big way. We need to organize, we need to break patterns, and we need to educate. Something that could be published online so we don't waste paper, a green print, so that it can draw folks from different walks of life within Peterborough to see what we can do together. And it's amazing the work that's already being done around transit and around cycling, and around what is being offered from the federal government if Jagmeet Singh is elected, around fares for mass transit fleets electrified by 2030. This is something that will happen. If we have the political will and we elect people who are determined to make these changes happen quickly.
Thank you. And then we will move to the next question. And Shantae, this will be yours first to answer. There are parallels, similarities among your platforms on climate change. If you agree, would you be willing to work together on federal level action in a coalition or collaborative framework for the sake of our children's future?
Most definitely. Greens have never been resistant to working alongside other governments to get effective policies put forward. Like you stated, it's very important that we leave a clean, reliable planet for our children and our grandchildren. It's the youth that are inheriting the world, and it's important that we support them through things such as retrofitting buildings. Again, that'll help with jobs within the local economy. It'll help cut back on greenhouse gases as well. It's very important that we stick to these principles and work together if we need to do something like that to get a real plan across.
Thank you. And Miriam, would you be willing to work together on federal level action in a coalition or collaborative framework for the sake of our children's future?
Yes, of course. But that coalition cannot afford the debate that'll take place with parties that have yet to settle the debate on whether or not climate change is real.
Thank you. And Joy, same question. Would you agree that you would be willing to work together on federal level action in a coalition or collaborative framework for the sake of our children's future?
There's nothing that would excite me more, and I'm so passionate about that possibility. I have an 11-year-old, and when I took her to school yesterday, you know, I couldn't help but think about the future and all the things that we've been witnessing around us, and what a challenging thought that is with this landscape, but we can make a difference for the next generation if we collaborate together, if we strategize together. It has to be done together for the sake of our children, and not just governments. We need to work with the organizations, the nonprofits, the groups, the green groups, that have done so much of the legwork and the research and have done this together. We need to be part of that process. And it excites me, whether or not I'm elected, to be part of a process of community building around a transformed economy. And Peterborough can do it. We have the shells, we have the old buildings there to be retrofitted, and we can create good green jobs and create a sense of hope for our children that are here. I would love to be there for that. And I hope you think about that when you vote.
And Michelle, your thoughts on collaborative framework for the future?
Absolutely. As I said in the beginning, this is a global crisis, not a national one. There are no borders. We all need to be working together for a greater good. This is a one initiative, not a me versus them initiative. I want to point out to our Clean Buildings Plan as well. So we have a 2030 bonus that will provide an additional benefit for those buildings that complete their retrofits prior to 2030, develop a net zero foundations program to begin putting in place the building blocks required to meet our net zero goals. And this will include continuing to develop the building codes and standards necessary to support net zero goals for both new builds and retrofits, develop curriculum for trade schools and institutes that support building design and construction, improving certificate standards, and developing initiatives to pilot new technologies and solutions that will lower the cost and speed up the pace of retrofits, particularly residential retrofits.
Thank you. Next question. We know that changing our habits on a personal or individual level is not enough to combat climate change. How can we get big businesses and the very wealthy to do their share? And Michelle, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Jim. I think it needs to be leveled playing field, right? To be able to get things more affordable here in Canada, right? And I think that's our fourth pillar when we look at our recovery plan of securing Canada. What are we doing here locally in our national, in our country to secure that, so that we don't need to be outsourcing to countries that are massive contributors to greenhouse gases like China. So I think there's a big push for us to be able to do things here affordably. And to do that, we need to stabilize our economy, get things rolling, and make things a lot more affordable. Right now, the cost of living isn't doing that. So we need to make it more affordable. We need to get things stabilized, and we need to be able to do things in-house a lot more. We have the resources to do it. We have everything here in Canada. We have everything we need here in Canada to do it, and to do it well.
Thank you. Joy, how can we get big business and the very wealthy to do their share on combating climate change?
Well, in the NDP platform, we have a very integrated intersectional approach. We know that it's very important for the ultra wealthy to pay their fair share, and when that taxation is put in place, we can invest in things like national pharmacare so that businesses don't have to foot the bill. We can save families so much in a year, $500 a year. We can save on these things, on internet and cell phone bills, on student debt. We need to consider the things that are most debilitating for people in this pandemic, and consider how we can mitigate this through a tax system that's fair, so that those low wage earners are not being taxed in the same measure as the ultra wealthy are. We need to make sure that we do this, and this is the time to do it. If ever there was a time, it's now. You know, Canadian billionaire wealth went up by 78 billion during this pandemic, and huge tax breaks for those who are at the top, and we're paying the price in our communities. The disparities are becoming greater, and you know, climate and good jobs and green jobs and a good affordable housing, it's all connected. We need to take stock, and we need to realize that, you know, we are an organism as a community, and we need to take care of each other. And if we provide the mental health supports, if we provide the pharmacare and the therapies that are
15
needed,
seconds.
we will have, in the long view, an outcome that is healthier and supported, and people with better lives. We can't keep leaving people behind and allowing the disparities to become greater.
Thank you. Miriam, your response?
Thanks, Jim. First and foremost, we're going to continue with our regime to price pollution. So the more you pollute, the more you pay. Unlike the Conservatives, who are going to give more incentives and subsidies to those who pollute more, we believe the more you pollute, the more you should pay. I will also add that, you know, in this economy, the Liberal Party of Canada is the only party who is demonstrating a plan that can protect the environment, the health of our environment, and create jobs at the same time. And when you look at investments we've already made as a Liberal government in the Clean Tech Commons, in the Green Economy Hub, local companies like Noble Gen, Carbonics, Random Acts of Greens, we're showing that we can move forward in a green, clean way and create jobs at the same time. As for tax fairness, one of the first things we did in 2015 was to ask the wealthiest to pay more, and we reduced taxes for the rest. And moving forward, we're going to ask the big banks, the insurance companies who have made profits during the pandemic to pay a little more so that we can support social and other programs for our communities and for our country.
Thank you. Shantae, you will close this one out.
Thank you. I think it's important that we treat this as the climate emergency that it is. Our green economy is the only way forward for our future. So we need to stop funding fossil fuels and redirect that money to renewable sources. As well, we would like to close tax loopholes, ways that people are like having money elsewhere and not paying the taxes for it that they need to. The Green government will also apply a corporate tax on transitional e-commerce companies doing business in Canada by requiring the foreign investor to register, collect, and remit taxes where the product or service is consumed. The e-commerce sector, giants like Netflix, Facebook, Amazon, Google, command a significant share of the Canadian market, but pay virtually no tax to it. So it's important that we put an end to things like this so that we can strengthen the Canadian economy.
Thank you. We are approaching 7:30 and the end of the debate, so this will be our last question. Joy, you will go first. Why is your party leader the best one to lead our country on the environment and climate change?
Thank you, Jim. Well, certainly we have a leader that is authentic and connects. He is true to his word and has been so far. He is deeply connected to people, and you know, from his own story and his struggles, he connects to issues that we're facing today, and he's come together with the best minds in the New Democratic Party to come up with a strategy and a platform that makes a difference. We know that we'll reduce our emissions by 50%, more than 50%, if we can, by 2030. We know that we need to have a robust carbon tax. And this is what Jagmeet promises as a leader, that we will do this. And to $170 per ton by 2030. We want to have electric vehicles. We need light duty vehicles with zero emissions by 2035. We need to transition to a low carbon economy yesterday. We need to retrain workers. We need to transform our template in Peterborough Kawartha. Trudeau voted against a 1% tax on wealth for those making over 20 million. That's the truth of it. And without asking the rich to pay their fair share, how can we invest in a transformed green economy? We need to get our priorities straight. O'Toole talks about supporting Main Street, but he's a Bay Street lawyer with a long history of siding with the large corporations and the largest polluters and Canada's elite. Trudeau allowed wealthiest to pay themselves bonuses. We need a leader with authenticity, with commitment to the planet and to the future. He promises that he will do this. We need to give New Democrats a chance. Everything we see before us right now has not been achieved. And Liberals have had 6 years to prove it, and they haven't done it. We need a change, and we need it now. I would like to be part of that change here in Peterborough Kawartha, and I am ready to do the work. And I love my community, and I hope you'll think about that and think about voting for a New Democrat leader in Peterborough Kawartha as well as in Ottawa.
Thank you. Shantae, why is your party leader the best one to lead our country on the environment and climate change?
Thank you. I think that Anna May Paul has proven that she is a strong professional with both international law experience as well as international and Canadian community connections. She's been a leader in these industries for a while now, and she understands that Canadians need and deserve change as well. She understands the urgency of a climate crisis. She will not buy a pipeline in the middle of trying to solve the climate crisis. Anna May believes that we should ensure all communities are a part of the conversation and that Indigenous communities have sovereignty. She has a daring vision as well. She isn't afraid of challenges, and she'll work across party lines as well to address the emergencies at hand. We've seen that she doesn't only walk the walk, she talks the talk. Unlike some of the other NDP leader, she doesn't drive a 6-cylinder sports car. She's practicing what she preaches. And I think it's important that we recognize that. It's time that Canada has a new leader, somebody who is daring, like I stated, and is ready to give not only Peterborough Kawartha, but all of Canada the change that we need and deserve.
Thank you. And Michelle.
Thank you, Jim. Erin O'Toole has a history of service to this country as a Canadian Forces member for 12 years. And those who are connected to those who serve in the Canadian Forces, they know that it's service and a plan and results, and it's action that goes along with that. Also, working in law, that is critical when we look at policy and making things change that will work. We need a leader who is not corrupt, and we need to have a leader who has good intentions. I would leave everybody to ask themselves why this election was called. And I think we need a leader right now who actually is serving the people and doing what needs to be done. We are in a pandemic, we are in a global climate crisis, and we need somebody who will do leadership and take care of Canada.
Thank you. And finally, Miriam.
Thanks, Jim. The Prime Minister, the Liberal Party of Canada, we're offering the best team, the best plan with the strongest leadership to move Canada forward, to finish the fight against the pandemic, to make life more affordable, and to address the biggest crisis of our time, climate change. Our leader put forward the boldest climate plan in Canada's history. A plan that was fought tooth and nail, not only by Mr. O'Toole, but also with Mr. Ford with his lawsuits and gas pump stickers. Prime Minister Trudeau made sure that Peterborough Kawartha had a voice around the cabinet table so that the experiences, the expertise, and the realities of our community was reflected in government decisions. We've got a 50-point plan to ensure that Canada moves forward to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, a plan that will be scrapped if a Conservative government is elected. The NDP and the Green Party don't have a legally mandated implementation plan to make sure that their climate plan meets their targets. And you don't have to take my word for this. The former BC Green leader, Andrew Weaver, called our plan bold and thoughtful, and the only credible plan put forward by any federal party. Mr. Tom Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, called our climate plan Absolutely marvelous. My colleagues here have spoken about many measures which are smart, but are already underway because of Liberal leadership. And with me as your voice in Ottawa, with a Liberal government re-elected, we'll continue to move Canada forward and ensure that we lead on the international community and create jobs here at home while fighting climate change.
Thank you. And thank you to whomever in the audience put that question up. It was a very nice summary for the end of this session. And that does bring us to the end of this session. I'd like to thank the 4 candidates, everyone who helped organize this event, and all of you who signed in to watch, listen, and add your questions. Don't forget the national leaders debates are on tonight in French and tomorrow in English. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Good night.